Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. Joanna kept the rock on her desk between a commendation plaque from the Interstellar Research Collective and a holographic image of the Meridian Outpost's first successful deep space cultivation experiment, which, if you knew anything about xenobiology research stations, was roughly equivalent to keeping a participation trophy next to your doctoral credentials and your Nobel Prize. The rock was ugly. Genuinely, spectacularly ugly. Mottled gray-green, with veins of something that might have been copper oxide or might have been alien fungus, nobody had bothered to check. It sat there on a little stand she'd fashioned from spare equipment, mounting brackets, elevated like it deserved reverence, like it meant something. It did mean something, actually. But we'll get to that. That's, the Admiral, tall, decorated, human enough to understand the concept of desk decorations, but confused enough to question this one, gestured vaguely at the rock. "Is that from Ocean 9? "It is," Joanna said, not looking up from her datapad, where she was currently arguing with Prim about the proper classification codes for semi-aquatic species with crystalline skeletal structures. "I was under the impression Ocean 9 was a no-contact zone. Council Classification Level 9. Apex Predator Dominant Species, no sapience indicators, potentially hostile to all off-world personnel. That is the official classification. Yes." Joanna tapped her stylus against the pad. Prime made an indignant beeping sound and corrected her syntax for the third time in as many minutes. The Admiral waited. Joanna had learned, over the course of dealing with military types, that they really hated when you didn't elaborate. It was a power move, the waiting. She could appreciate that. She let him wait another 10 seconds, finished her notation, then set down the pad and looked at him properly. "You want to know why I have a rock from a no-contact planet sitting on my desk? Like I won it at a carnival." The thought had crossed my mind. Joanna leaned back in her chair, which protested with a squeak that suggested Meridian Outpost's maintenance budget was, as usual, being funneled elsewhere. Probably into whatever new monitoring grid the Council had dreamed up this month. She picked up the rock, turned it over in her hands. It was cool, dense, heavier than it looked. "Prim," she said, "you want to tell the Admiral what I was doing on Ocean 9? The AI's interface lit up on the wall panel, a soft blue glow that pulsed in a way that Joanna had long ago decided meant resigned to this conversation. Dr. Joanna Mills was assigned to conduct non-invasive atmospheric and biological surveys of Ocean 9 from orbital distance. No planetary contact was authorized. No landing procedures were approved. No interaction with indigenous life forms was permitted under any circumstances, as outlined in Galactic Council Protocol Section. "Prim loves protocols," Joanna interrupted. "Goes on about them at parties. Real hit with the other AI units." "I do not attend parties," Prime said, with what might have been dignity if you believed AIs could feel such things. Joanna did, but that was another argument for another time. The Admiral was still standing there, waiting, and Joanna supposed she owed him the story. After all, he'd come all the way out to Meridian Outpost, which was not exactly a hop and a skip from anything resembling civilization. The least she could do was explain why her career was technically in violation of about 18 different interstellar treaties and why she was completely unrepentant about it. "6 months ago," Joanna began, setting the rock back on its makeshift pedestal, "I was doing exactly what Prim said. Orbital surveys. Very boring. Very safe. Very much in compliance with every rule the Council could think up. I had my little research pod, my scanners, my sampling equipment. I was the model of scientific restraint. And then? And then my pod decided that structural integrity was more of a guideline than a rule. Priam interjected, a micrometeor impact compromised the hull plating, which led to a cascading failure in the navigation system, which resulted in uncontrolled atmospheric entry. I crashed, Joanna translated, spectacularly. Right in the middle of what I later learned was a breeding ground for Ossians. The Admiral's expression shifted into something that might have been concern or might have been the early stages of a migraine. You survived a crash landing on a planet full of apex predators. Well, obviously. I'm sitting here talking to you, aren't I? Joanna grinned, though survived is doing some heavy lifting in that sentence. When I crawled out of the pod, which was on fire, by the way, really added to the whole welcome to the neighborhood atmosphere, I had about 6 seconds to assess my situation before I realized I wasn't alone. She could still remember it. The smell of burning polymer and ozone, the way the air on Ossian 9 tasted faintly metallic, the sound of the pod's emergency systems screaming warnings that were, frankly, a bit late to be useful. And then the other sound, the low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Ossians, she continued, are not small creatures. The adults average about 4 meters at the shoulder. 6 limbs, crystalline claws that can shred hull plating, bioluminescent patterns running along their spines and flanks. The Council classified them as non-sapient because they don't use tools, don't build structures, don't communicate in any way our standard protocols recognize. But they are sapient, the Admiral said. It wasn't a question. Oh, incredibly. Just not in any way the Council bothered to look for. Joanna pulled up a holographic display showing the footage Prim had captured. This is what I saw when I turned around. The image showed 5 adult Ossians arranged in a loose semicircle around the crashed pod. Their bioluminescent markings pulsed in patterns that seemed almost synchronized, and their eyes, multiple pairs per creature, clustered in ways that suggested compound vision, reflected the firelight with an unsettling intelligence. They didn't attack, the Admiral observed. No, they watched, and that's when I knew the Council had it wrong. Joanna zoomed in on one of the creatures. See that? The way it's positioned? That's not predatory stalking. That's evaluation. They were trying to figure out what I was. And what did you do? Joanna laughed, the sound sharp and a little unhinged even to her own ears. I did what any reasonable xenobiologist would do when faced with potentially hostile megafauna on an unauthorized landing. I stood very still and tried not to wet myself. Prim added helpfully, "Your heart rate was elevated to 160 beats per minute. Adrenaline levels suggested imminent fight-or-flight response." "Thank you, Prim. Very helpful." Joanna dismissed the hologram. I was there for maybe 10 minutes, just standing, waiting. They were waiting too, I think. And then the adults did something I didn't expect. Which was? They left. Joanna shrugged, just turned around and walked away. All 5 of them, moving in formation like they'd discussed it. Which, in retrospect, they probably had. We just don't recognize their communication methods? The Admiral frowned. They abandoned a potential threat near their breeding ground? That's what I thought, too. Seemed odd. Seemed really odd. Joanna's grin widened. And then I met the cubs. She pulled up another image. 4 Ossian juveniles, each roughly the size of a ground transport vehicle, with oversized paws and bioluminescent patterns that flickered erratically, like they hadn't quite figured out how to control them yet. "Oh, no," the Admiral said. "Oh, yes. The adults left me with the kids." Joanna zoomed in on the closest cub. This one had these uneven patches along its back, like someone had spilled glow paint on it. The patterns were asymmetrical, splotchy. The other three had more regular markings. The footage showed the cubs approaching cautiously, their movements a combination of predatory grace and youthful clumsiness. One of them, the splotchy one, got too close to the burning pod and jumped back with what could only be described as startled surprise. "They were curious," Joanna said, "and I was the most interesting thing they'd probably ever seen. New smell, new shape, making weird noises. I was still trying to call for help on my communicator, which was thoroughly broken, and I was in their space. This seems like a situation with a very predictable outcome," the Admiral said slowly. "You'd think. But here's where it gets interesting." Joanna fast-forwarded the footage. "I've studied predator behavior, spent 2 years on Proxima doing field research on pack hunters. You learn to read body language, energy levels, threat displays. And these cubs, they weren't threatening. They were playing." The video showed one cub pouncing on a piece of debris from the pod, batting it around with crystalline claws that could have disemboweled Joanna without much effort. Another cub joined in, and they tumbled over each other in a way that was startlingly similar to earth wolves at play. "So I made a decision," Joanna said. "Probably a stupid one, definitely an unauthorized one. I decided to treat them like what they were, kids. You interacted with them." I sat down. Joanna pointed at the screen, where her past self was lowering herself to the ground, moving slowly and deliberately. Made myself smaller, less threatening. Kept my hands visible. And I waited. The splotchy cub approached first, nose, or what passed for a nose, extended toward Joanna. The other three hung back, watching. "Its breath smelled like copper and ozone," Joanna said quietly, remembering. "I could feel the heat coming off its body, could see every detail of those crystalline claws. And I just sat there. Let it sniff me, investigate me. Didn't move." The footage showed the cub's bioluminescent patterns brightening, the splotches glowing more intensely. Then it did something unexpected. It sat down too. "And that," Joanna said, "is when I knew we were going to be friends." The Admiral was staring at the screen with an expression that suggested he was reconsidering every decision that had led him to this moment. "You befriended apex predator cubs on a no-contact planet." "Befriended" is a strong word. More like reached an understanding, Joanna grinned. "They decided I was interesting enough to keep around. I decided they were fascinating enough to study up close. Prim had a breakdown about protocol violations." "I did not have a breakdown," Prime said. "I merely registered concerns about—" "You threatened to file 18 separate incident reports." "Which I did file, as per regulations." Joanna waved a hand dismissively. "Anyway, the cubs and we had an arrangement. They'd come investigate me, I'd let them. They'd bring me things." "Things?" "Oh, you know, bits of local fauna they'd killed, interesting sticks, shiny pieces of mineral deposits." Joanna picked up the rock again. "And this. The splotchy one brought me this on day 3. The Admiral looked at the rock, then at Joanna, then back at the rock. "A cub brought you a rock. Not just any rock. This rock. Dropped it right at my feet, then sat there making this rumbling sound that I'm pretty sure was pleasure when I picked it up and made a fuss over it." Joanna's expression softened slightly. "It was a gift. The first real interspecies cultural exchange on Ocean 9. And it came from a juvenile who wanted to show the weird alien something cool it had found. And you kept it. Of course I kept it. You don't refuse a gift from a creature that could bite you in half. That's just rude. Joanna set the rock back down. Besides, it was important. That cub chose to share something with me, recognized me as worthy of a gift. That's sapience, Admiral. That's culture. That's everything the Council said the Oseans didn't have. The Admiral was quiet for a moment, processing. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, measured. I'm guessing the Council didn't see it that way. Oh, we're just getting to that part, Joanna said. See, I was on Ocean 9 for 3 weeks before the rescue ship showed up. 3 weeks of living in a half-destroyed pod, eating emergency rations that tasted like regret, and hanging out with 4 cubs who thought I was either a toy or a very disappointing pack member. And in those 3 weeks, I learned more about the Oseans than the Council had in 50 years of observation. She pulled up more footage, documentation of behaviors, interaction patterns, the complex social structures that became obvious once you knew what to look for. They hunt cooperatively. They share resources. They teach their young. They have territories and boundaries and social hierarchies. Joanna pointed at specific examples. And more than that, they've been watching us, the Council, the research ships. They knew we were there, and they chose not to engage. That's not animal behavior. That's political calculation. And when the rescue ship arrived, Joanna's grin turned sharp. That's when things got really interesting. Prim's interface pulsed. Shall I prepare the next segment of documentation? Please do. Joanna turned back to the Admiral. You're going to want to sit down for this part. Trust me. The Admiral, to his credit, pulled up a chair. He glanced at the rock one more time, and Joanna could see him reassessing it, understanding starting to dawn. It's not just a rock, is it? He said. Nothing's ever just anything, Joanna replied. That's the first rule of xenobiology. And the Oseans? They're about to teach the Galactic Council that lesson the hard way. The rescue ship arrived on a morning that smelled like rain, which was impossible because Ocean 9's atmosphere didn't do rain the way human brains understood it. More like condensed mineral vapor that fell upward before deciding gravity was worth respecting. Joanna had stopped trying to explain it to Prim. She'd been attempting to repair the pod's communication array with materials that absolutely were not designed for communication arrays when she heard it. The low thrumming of descent engines, getting closer. Her heart did something complicated in her chest, relief and dread in equal measure. Prim, we've got company. Confirmed. Galactic Council vessel. Registry number indicates Commander Ulmantha's ship. Estimated time to landing, 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Joanna looked around at her temporary home. The pod was a disaster, held together with hope and improvised welding. Her clothes were shredded in 3 places from when one of the cubs had gotten overenthusiastic during playtime. She probably smelled like something that had died and been repurposed as a sleeping bag. The cubs were nowhere in sight, which was unusual. They typically showed up around this time, bringing their daily offerings of murder and geology. Prim, where are... She didn't get to finish the question. The splotchy cub emerged from the tree line. Not trees, really. More like crystalline structures that photosynthesized, but tree line was easier. And it was moving fast. Behind it came the other 3 cubs, and behind them... Oh, that's new, Joanna muttered. The adult Oseans. All 5 of them, arranged in formation, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing in synchronized waves that Joanna had learned meant either territorial warning or We're thinking very hard about something. Context was everything. The cubs reached her first. The splotchy one pressed its massive head against her side, hard enough to nearly knock her over, rumbling like distant thunder. The others circled, agitated, their claws leaving deep furrows in the ground. "Hey, hey, it's okay," Joanna said, knowing they couldn't understand her words but hoping tone would translate. "Just some visitors, probably here to yell at me about protocols." The rescue ship landed with unnecessary precision about 50 meters away, engines kicking up debris and making the cubs flatten their ears, or what passed for ears. The adults didn't move, didn't even flinch. They just watched with those multifaceted eyes that saw things humans probably couldn't imagine. The ship's ramp extended. Commander Ulmantha emerged, and Joanna had to give them credit. They saw the Oseans, all 9 of them surrounding the crashed pod, and didn't immediately run back inside. The Rigelian's translucent skin flickered through several colors that Joanna's xenobiology training identified as extreme concern, and "Are you kidding me right now?" "Dr. Mills," Ulmantha's voice came through the external speakers, amplified and formal. "Please move away from the indigenous life forms. Slowly." "I'm fine where I am, thanks." "That was not a request. You are in immediate danger." The splotchy cub chose that moment to flop down at Joanna's feet, belly up, making the sort of contented rumbling that she'd learned meant, "Scratch my stomach, or I'll be disappointed in you forever." She crouched down and obliged, her hand barely making a dent in the thick hide. "Does this look like immediate danger to you, Commander?" Even from this distance, she could see Ulmantha's skin flash orange. "You have contaminated a no-contact species. You have violated Council Protocol Section. Pram already gave me the lecture, several times, with citations." Joanna stood up, the cub rolling back to its feet with the grace of a landslide. "But here's the thing, Commander. These aren't non-sapient predators. They're people. They are classified wrong." Joanna gestured at the Echoidim adults. "You see that? The way they're positioned. That's protective formation. They knew you were coming before I did. They brought the cubs here to make a statement." Ulmantha finally descended the ramp, flanked by 2 security officers who looked like they'd rather be literally anywhere else. "The Council has monitored this species from orbit, from a distance. You've been watching them like they're animals in a zoo." Joanna felt the splotchy cub press against her leg, solid and warm. "But they've been watching you too, learning, waiting." "That is speculation." "Is it?" Joanna pulled up her datapad, still miraculously functional. "Prim, show them the footage from day 8. The holographic display projected outward. It showed one of the adult Oseans manipulating a piece of the pod's hull plating, testing its edges, its weight, its properties. Then, deliberately, carefully, shaping it with those crystalline claws into something resembling a cutting tool. Tool use. Unmistakable, undeniable tool use. Ulmantha's skin went very pale. This changes. Everything. Yeah." Joanna closed the display. "The Oseans aren't primitive. They're selective. They don't build cities because they don't need cities. They don't use metal tools because their claws are better. They don't communicate in ways our scanners recognize because our scanners are looking for the wrong things." One of the adult Oseans moved then, a slow, deliberate approach toward Ulmantha's group. The security officers raised weapons, and Joanna's heart stopped. "Don't! Do not!" The Osean stopped 3 meters away. Its bioluminescent patterns shifted, and Joanna recognized the sequence. She'd seen it before, during the cubs' play sessions. It was a greeting, an offering of peaceful intent. "Lower your weapons," she called out. "It's trying to communicate." "Mills, that creature could rip you apart. Yes, I'm aware. Could also have done that to me any time in the last 3 weeks, and chose not to." Joanna walked toward the Ocean, the cubs following like a bizarre honor guard. "Trust me, please." The Ocean's eyes tracked her movement. Then it did something that made Ulmantha's skin flash through 6 colors in rapid succession. It lowered its head, a gesture of acknowledgement, of respect. Joanna reached out slowly and touched the crystalline ridge above its eyes. The creature rumbled, deep and resonant, and its bioluminescent patterns brightened. "They've been waiting," Joanna said quietly, "for someone to actually see them, not as threats, not as specimens, as equals." The splotchy cub chose that moment to trot over to Ulmantha and drop something at their feet. Another rock, this one shot through with veins of something that glittered in the light. "Congratulations, Commander," Joanna said, unable to keep the grin off her face. "You just received your first diplomatic gift from Ocean 9. I'd suggest you accept it graciously." Ulmantha stared at the rock like it might explode. "Pick it up," Joanna urged. "Trust me, this is history happening right now." Ulmantha did not pick up the rock. Instead, the Rigelian commander stood there, skin cycling through colors that probably meant something profound in their culture, but to Joanna just looked like a very expensive mood ring having a crisis. The security officers had lowered their weapons, but maintained what they clearly believed was a safe distance, which was adorable considering the adult Oceans could cross that gap in about half a second if they felt motivated. The splotchy cub sat down next to its offering, looking between Ulmantha and Joanna with an expression that suggested it was reconsidering its gift-giving strategy. "Commander," Joanna said, keeping her voice level, "you're making this weird." "Making what weird? The part where you've established unauthorized contact with a protected species, or the part where you're suggesting I engage in diplomatic relations with creatures classified as non-sapient?" "Both. Definitely both." Joanna crouched down and picked up the rock herself, turning it over in her hands. The veins weren't just decorative, she realized. They formed patterns, almost geometric, intentional. "Prim, you getting this?" "Recording. The mineral composition includes traces of lithium compounds and rare earth elements. The vein patterns appear artificially enhanced." Ulmantha's skin flashed orange again. "Artificially?" "Meaning someone carved these patterns. Someone with precision and intent." Joanna held the rock up to the light. "The cubs don't just find these rocks, Commander. They make them. Or the adults make them and give them to the cubs to distribute. Either way, this is art. This is culture. This is every single thing your classification says they don't have." The adult Ocean that had approached earlier made a low sound, not quite a growl, but something that resonated in Joanna's chest. The cubs responded immediately, their bioluminescent patterns synchronizing with the adults in a display that was absolutely, undeniably communication. "They're talking," one of the security officers whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "They've always been talking," Joanna said. "We just weren't listening. The council classified them as non-sapient because they don't have vocal cords like ours, don't build structures we recognize as architecture, don't use technology that fits our narrow definition of tools. But look at them. Really look." She gestured at the adult Oceans, at the way they held position with military precision, at how the cubs deferred to them while maintaining their own individual behaviors. "They have social structure. They have teaching methods. I've watched the adults show the cubs hunting techniques. They have territorial boundaries they enforce without violence when possible. And they have this. Joanna held up the carved rock. They create beauty. They share it. They understand the concept of gifts, of building relationships through exchange. That's not instinct, Commander. That's civilization. Ulmantha was quiet for a long moment. When they spoke again, their voice was carefully controlled. If what you're suggesting is accurate, this represents a significant classification error. That's one way to put it. Another way is that the Council has been sitting on mineral rights to a planet inhabited by sapient beings for half a century, which is exactly the kind of thing that starts interstellar incidents. You're accusing the Council of... I'm not accusing anyone of anything. Yet. Joanna met the commander's gaze steadily. But I am saying that this needs to be corrected. The Oseans deserve recognition. They deserve a seat at the table, protection under sapient species treaties. All of it. One human researcher's observations are not sufficient evidence for reclassification. The process requires peer review, committee analysis, extensive documentation, which I have. Priam's interface pulsed brighter. 3 weeks of continuous observation, behavioral analysis, tool use documentation, social interaction patterns, communication structure mapping. I have compiled 6,000 hours of data that supports Dr. Mills's conclusions. 6,000 hours in 3 weeks? Ulmantha's skepticism was palpable. Multiple recording devices operating simultaneously, Priam said, with what might have been pride. I am very efficient. Joanna grinned. Priam doesn't sleep. One of the perks of being an AI. The other perks include being pedantic about protocols and filing incident reports, but we don't talk about those. The splotchy cub stood up, apparently bored with the conversation, and wandered over to investigate the rescue ship. One of the security officers tensed, but Joanna held up a hand. Let it look. Curiosity is natural. It's approaching a council vessel, and if you shoot it, every adult in visual range will tear your ship apart, followed shortly by you. Joanna kept her tone conversational. Just a friendly observation from someone who's spent 3 weeks learning what irritates them. The cub sniffed at the ship's landing struts. Then, with the kind of casual strength that made Joanna's engineer brain weep, pushed against the hull, testing it, learning about it. After a moment, it lost interest and trotted back to join its siblings. See? No harm done. They're not aggressive unless threatened. Joanna turned back to Ulmantha. Which brings me to my next point. Why did the Council classify them as dangerous in the first place? The commander's skin shifted to a neutral gray. Initial surveys encountered hostile behavior. Multiple observation teams were attacked. 2 ships were damaged severely enough to require emergency evacuation. When was this? Approximately 60 years ago. Joanna felt something click into place in her mind. 60 years. Right, around when the Council started surveying for mineral deposits. Did those initial teams land on the planet? I would need to check the historical records. But probably, right? Because that's standard procedure for geological surveys. Land, take samples, mark territory for future mining operations. Joanna looked at the adult Oseans, at their careful positioning, at the way they'd brought the cubs to this meeting. And the Oseans defended their home. Because that's what sapient beings do when uninvited guests show up and start taking things. You're suggesting the hostility was justified. I'm suggesting it was predictable. You can't just land on someone's planet, start drilling holes and taking samples, and expect them to be thrilled about it. Joanna gestured at the Oseans again. They've been waiting, Commander. Waiting for someone to approach them properly. As equals, not as specimens or obstacles to resource extraction. Ulamantha's skin flickered through several colors before settling on something that might have been resignation. Even if I accept your analysis, and I'm not saying I do, the political complications are substantial. The mining consortium has invested significant resources based on the current classification. Changing that classification would invalidate their claims, potentially cost them billions. Oh, here we go. Joanna laughed, sharp and humorless. It's not about what's right. It's about who loses money. That's not what I... That's exactly what you said. The Ossians have been labeled dangerous animals for 60 years, not because they are dangerous animals, but because admitting they're sapient would be financially inconvenient for someone with a council contract. The largest of the adult Ossians moved then, a slow approach that made everyone except Joanna tense. It walked past her, past the cubs, and stopped directly in front of Ulmantha. Up close, the creature was massive, easily 3 times the Rigelian's height, with claws that caught the light like daggers. It lowered its head. The same gesture the other adult had shown Joanna earlier. Acknowledgement. Respect. And then it did something that made Joanna's breath catch. It placed one crystalline claw on the ground and drew a symbol. 3 lines intersecting at angles, with smaller marks branching off. Deliberate, precise, unmistakably intentional. Prim. Tell me you're getting this. Recording. Cross-referencing the symbol against known communication systems. The Ossian drew another symbol, then another. A sequence. A pattern. The cubs watched with their asymmetric eyes, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing in rhythm with the adult's movements. It's writing, one of the security officers said, voice barely audible. It's actually writing. Not writing, Prime corrected. The symbols don't match any known linguistic structure, but they are representational. Each symbol corresponds to... The AI paused. 2 locations. Territorial markers. This is a map. The Ossian stepped back, leaving the symbols clear and visible in the dirt. It looked at Ulmantha, then at Joanna, then back at its artwork. Joanna crouched down to study the symbols more closely. They're showing us their territory, their home ranges, their boundaries. This is a political statement. They're saying, this is ours. These are our borders. We expect you to respect them. Speculation, Ulmantha said, but the word lacked conviction. Informed analysis based on behavioral observation and contextual evidence, Joanna countered. Also known as doing my job. She stood up, facing the commander directly. You came here to rescue me. Fine. Mission accomplished. I'm rescued. But you can't ignore what's right in front of you. The Ossians are sapient. They've been sapient this whole time, and they're offering you a chance to fix 60 years of mistakes. By doing what, exactly? By recommending reclassification. By admitting the Council got it wrong. By giving the Ossians what they deserve. Joanna picked up the carved rock the cub had offered earlier and held it out to Ulmantha. By accepting this gift and starting a real dialogue. The commander stared at the rock. The adult Ossian rumbled, low and expectant. The cubs had gone still, watching. If I take that, Ulmantha said slowly, I'm acknowledging them as diplomatic entities. Yes? Which would create legal complications, political ramifications, potentially destabilize existing council contracts? All true. Also the right thing to do. Joanna kept the rock extended. Your choice, Commander. You can follow protocols and maintain the status quo, or you can make history. What's it going to be? The Rigelian's skin cycled through a dozen colors in rapid succession. Then, slowly, deliberately, Ulmantha reached out and took the rock. The adult Ocean's bioluminescent patterns flared bright. The cubs began to rumble in unison, a sound that resonated through the ground and into Joanna's bones. It sounded, she thought, like approval. "Congratulations," Joanna said, grinning. "You just made first contact. Try not to screw it up." The political fallout was, predictably, spectacular. Ulmantha filed the reclassification petition within 6 hours of returning to orbit, which meant that by the time Joanna had showered off 3 weeks of questionable hygiene decisions and changed into clothes that didn't smell like apex predator, the council was already in emergency session. Priam reported that the diplomatic channels were, quote, experiencing unprecedented communication volume, which was AI speak for everyone is yelling at each other in 12 different languages simultaneously. The mining consortium filed an injunction within hours. 3 member species lodged formal complaints about procedural violations. The Rigelian Diplomatic Corps issued a statement that was 70% legal disclaimers and 30% "we're looking into it." Joanna watched the chaos unfold from the observation deck of Ulmantha's ship, eating synthesized food that tasted like cardboard but was at least reliably non-poisonous, and feeling absolutely no remorse whatsoever. "You're enjoying this," Prim observed. "I'm enjoying the part where bureaucrats have to confront reality. The part where the Oseans might actually get recognized as people, that I am cautiously optimistic about." Joanna pulled up the live feed from the council chambers. "How's the vote looking?" Preliminary polling suggests 42% in favor of reclassification, 38% opposed, 20% abstaining pending further evidence. "So we need to convince the fence-sitters." "That would be the strategic approach, yes." Joanna grinned. "Good thing we have 6,000 hours of footage showing sapient behavior, tool use, communication, social structures, and diplomatic overtures. Think that counts as evidence?" The opposition is arguing that isolated behaviors do not constitute proof of sapience, that alternative explanations exist for all observed phenomena, and that hasty reclassification sets dangerous precedents for... They're arguing that money is more important than doing the right thing. Got it. Joanna stood up, her muscles protesting after weeks of sleeping in a crashed pod. "Where's Ulmantha?" "The commander is in conference with council representatives. You are not authorized to..." "Priam, you know me better than that." The AI's interface pulsed in a pattern Joanna had learned meant resigned disapproval. "Deck 9, Conference Room 3. Security protocols are in place." "Security protocols are suggestions." Joanna headed for the door. "You coming?" "I am an integrated ship system. I am already there." Smart Alec. She found the conference room guarded by 2 security officers who looked like they'd been briefed on her tendency to ignore restrictions. They moved to block her path, and Joanna was preparing to argue her way through when Ulmantha's voice came through the door panel. "Let her in." The guards exchanged glances but stepped aside. Joanna entered to find the commander in holographic conference, with at least 20 council representatives. Their various forms of anatomy floating in the air like a very strange advertisement for interspecies cooperation. "Dr. Mills," one of them said, a Centaurian whose name Joanna didn't catch. "Your presence is irregular. So is classifying sapient beings as animals for 60 years. But here we are." Joanna pulled up a chair. "What's the problem?" Ulmantha's skin flashed a color that probably meant, "Please don't make this worse." But the commander's voice remained diplomatic. "The council requires additional assurance that the Oseans pose no threat to future contact operations." They're not the ones who attacked first. We've been over this. Nevertheless, historical incidents cannot be dismissed. The mining consortium representatives are arguing that unrestricted access to Ocean 9 creates unacceptable risk. Joanna felt her jaw tighten. The mining consortium representatives can argue whatever they want. Doesn't change the facts. The Oceans are sapient. They've demonstrated peaceful intent when approached respectfully, and they have every right to control access to their own planet. A voice from one of the holograms, species uncertain, chimed in. Your evidence is compelling but limited to a single researcher's experience. Peer review requires multiple independent observations. Yeah, I know. Joanna leaned forward. So send more researchers. Establish proper contact protocols. Do it right this time. But don't use the excuse of we need more data to maintain a classification you know is wrong. The financial implications are the consortium's problem, not the Oceans. Joanna pulled up her datapad, projecting the footage of the adult Ocean drawing territorial maps in the dirt. They know what mining operations are. They've been watching you survey their planet for decades, and they're telling you, as clearly as they can without vocal cords, that they have boundaries and they expect you to respect them. The holographic representatives conferred among themselves in multiple languages. Joanna waited, watching Ulmantha's skin cycle through nervous colors. Finally, the Centaurian spoke again. What are you proposing? Immediate reclassification to sapient status, with full protections under interspecies treaty law. Establishment of formal diplomatic contact, with protocols designed around Ocean communication methods rather than forcing them to adapt to ours. And, Joanna pulled up another file, I want to lead the contact team. That is highly irregular. You've already compromised objectivity through unauthorized interaction. I've established rapport with a species that's been hostile to Council presence for 60 years. I've documented their culture, learned their social structures, and received diplomatic overtures in the form of mineral gifts that I will cherish forever. Joanna's voice hardened. And more importantly, the Oceans trust me. They brought their cubs to meet Ulmantha because I was there as a bridge. You want successful contact? You need someone they'll actually talk to. Ulmantha's skin shifted to a color Joanna didn't recognize. The commander spoke carefully. Dr. Mills is correct. The Oceans demonstrated clear preference for her presence during first contact protocols. Replacing her would likely be interpreted as hostile. You're basing interspecies policy on the preferences of sapient beings who deserve consideration, yes. Joanna stood up. Look, you can argue about this for months, while the consortium's lawyers file injunctions and the Oceans wonder why we're ignoring them. Or you can make the call right now. Reclassify, establish contact, do it properly. What's it going to be? The silence stretched. Joanna could see representatives conferring, skin colors shifting, appendages gesturing. Politics in action, slow and frustrating. Then the Centaurian said, We'll put it to vote. Immediate session. Results within the hour. Good enough. Joanna nodded to Ulmantha and left the conference room, her heart pounding harder than she wanted to admit. Priam's voice followed her into the corridor. That was either brilliant or catastrophically reckless. Why not both? 53 minutes later, the vote came through. Reclassification approved, 68 to 32, with 12 abstentions. The Oceans were officially recognized as sapient beings. The mining consortium's contracts were suspended pending negotiation with Ocean representatives, and Joanna Mills was appointed head of the newly created Interspecies Relations Initiative, reporting directly to the Council. She read the notification 3 times to make sure it was real. "Congratulations," Priam said. "You've completely upended your career trajectory." "Yeah," Joanna laughed, surprised by the sound of her own relief. "Yeah, I guess I did." Ulmantha found her in the observation deck an hour later, looking down at Ocean 9 rotating below. "The Council wants you back on Meridian Outpost to establish a formal contact facility," the commander said. "You'll have a full team, proper equipment, actual protocols instead of improvised survival techniques." "Sounds official." "It is. Very official." Ulmantha held out a small container. "Before you leave, I thought you should have this properly preserved. For your desk." Joanna opened the container. Inside, cushioned and protected, was the carved rock the splotchy cub had given Ulmantha. The one that had started everything. "You're giving me your first diplomatic gift?" "You'll display it better than I would. Besides," the commander's skin flickered with something that might have been amusement, "I suspect I'll receive many more where that came from." "Probably. The cubs are generous like that." Speaking of which, Ulmantha pulled up a holographic display. "We've been monitoring surface activity. Your cubs have been bringing gifts to the landing site daily. Rocks, mostly. Some crystalline structures that our geologists are very excited about. And this." The image showed a piece of hull plating from Joanna's crashed pod, carefully shaped into something resembling a cutting tool. Unmistakable. Undeniable. "They're still trying to communicate," Joanna said softly. "Then perhaps you should go talk to them. Officially, this time." 3 days later, Joanna stood in her new office on Meridian Outpost, arranging items on her desk. Commendations, awards, holographic displays of successful research projects, and in the center, on a custom-made stand that Prim had fabricated with unnecessary precision, the ugly gray-green rock with its veins of maybe copper oxide, maybe alien fungus. Her first gift from another world. Her first proof that sapience wore many faces, many forms, and sometimes came with crystalline claws and bioluminescent patterns. The door chimed. Joanna looked up to find a junior researcher standing there, nervous and excited. "Dr. Mills, the shuttle is ready. The Oseans are waiting at the contact site. There are a lot of them, adults and cubs. They brought something for you." Joanna grinned, grabbed her field kit, and headed for the door. "Let me guess. Rocks?" "Lots of rocks, and what looks like carved symbols. The linguistics team is losing their minds." "Good. Let's go make history. Again." She paused at the doorway, looked back at her desk, at the rock sitting there like a trophy. Because it was a trophy. A reminder that sometimes the most important discoveries came not from distance and detachment, but from sitting in the dirt with creatures that could kill you, and choosing to see them as people instead. The universe was full of wonders, Joanna thought. And humanity's gift, their peculiar talent, was recognizing wonder in unexpected places. Even when it came with 6 limbs and wanted to give you rocks,